I'd always liked hiking alone. I found a kind of peace in it that I didn't get anywhere else. There was no noise, no phones, no people. Just the wind, the ground under my boots, and the steady rhythm of my breath. I'd been doing it for years, sometimes on mountain trails, sometimes deep in the woods, and sometimes in the desert. I had experience. I had gear. I wasn't reckless. But none of that mattered when everything went wrong. This trip was supposed to be simple. A 3-day hike through a desert canyon system in southern Utah. I'd done similar routes before. Nothing technical. Just long, hot days and dry air. The kind of trip where you ration water and keep a close eye on the sky. It was early spring, a good time for desert hikes. Warm in the day, cool at night, and fewer bugs. I had planned everything. Checked the weather, packed all the essentials, told someone where I was going. I didn't rush. I never do. I parked my truck near the trailhead, a dirt pull-off about 20 miles from the nearest paved road. No other cars were there, which I liked. I had the whole area to myself. The trail started flat, winding between dry shrubs and red rocks, then dropped down into a narrow canyon. I had to scramble a bit in spots, lowering myself over ledges and working through tight spaces where the sandstone walls came close enough to touch both sides with my hands. By late afternoon on the first day, I'd gone about 10 miles. I found a good place to camp, a flat area under an overhang, with soft sand to sleep on and a little shade for cooking. I was careful with my water. I carried 6 liters and knew I'd pass a natural spring the next morning. The sun set behind the canyon walls, and the temperature dropped fast. I wrapped myself in my sleeping bag and slept hard. The second day started calm. I was up before the sun, had a protein bar and some water, and packed my gear. The trail was getting deeper into the canyon system now. The walls rose higher on both sides, and the path twisted through dry stream beds and underhanging rock. I kept checking the sky, even though the forecast had been clear. In the desert, you learn to respect the weather. A sudden storm miles away can cause flash floods where there's no rain. I reached the spring around noon. It was a small pool in the rock, fed by a trickle that ran down from above. I filtered and refilled all my bottles, soaked my hat, and sat for a bit. The air was still, quiet. Even the insects seemed to be hiding. I pushed on. Around mid-afternoon, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. The air felt heavier. Not hot, not cold, just heavy. It's hard to explain. The sky above the narrow canyon was still blue, but something felt off. I stopped and stood still. The silence had changed. There was a faint rumble, deep and distant, like thunder far away. I looked up. From where I stood, I couldn't see the horizon, only the thin slice of sky above. But that sound wasn't in my head. It was real. Distant, yes, but coming closer. I picked up my pace. I didn't run, not yet, but I started looking for exits, ways to climb out of the canyon if I had to. The problem was the walls were too steep now. Solid rock on both sides, 50 to 60 feet high, sometimes more. No footholds, no ropes. I was in a slot, narrow, twisting, and deep. That's the worst place to be when water comes. I told myself it might just be a plane, or wind, or maybe some kind of distant construction. But the sound got louder. It was no longer a rumble. It was a roar, not thunder. Water. Fast, heavy water crashing down rocks and slamming through the narrow canyon upstream. I turned around, scanning the ground for a way up. Nothing. The rock was sheer. I had maybe 2 feet of flat ground on either side of the dry creek bed. No trees, no ledges low enough to climb, nowhere to go. And then I saw it, a bend in the canyon up ahead with a small outcrop about 6 feet high. Not much, but maybe enough. I sprinted. My legs felt slow, like I was running in sand. My pack bounced against my back, and my breath came hard. As I reached the outcrop, I heard it, closer now, the sound of destruction. Not like a river, not like a stream, but like a wall of force tearing through stone and dragging everything with it. I threw my pack up first, then scrambled after it. The rock was slick and steep, but I got up. Not high enough to be safe, not really, but better than nothing. I crouched, heart pounding, eyes fixed on the bend in the canyon behind me. Then it came. I'll never forget that sight. A wall of brown water, at least 10 feet high, surging around the corner like a living thing. Carried branches, rocks, mud, pieces of wood, everything. It moved so fast I barely had time to react. It hit the bend and exploded upward, slamming into both canyon walls, then shot forward in a boiling mess of debris and foam. The first wave hit my outcrop and splashed over it, soaking my legs. The second wave was higher. I grabbed a crack in the rock and held on. The water reached my knees, then dropped again, swirling and churning below me. The sound was deafening. I could barely think. I kept looking down, afraid the whole ledge would give way or that the water would rise again. Kept rushing past, wave after wave, for what felt like an hour. In truth, it was probably 10 minutes. Then it slowed. Not stopped, but slowed. The level dropped a few feet, and I could see the debris piled in the canyon floor. Logs, smashed shrubs, even the torn remains of some other hikers' gear. I didn't want to think about who it had belonged to. I stayed on that ledge for the next 2 hours. I didn't move. My legs went numb. The sun began to set, and the air got cold. The water kept flowing, but slower now, more like a fast-moving river than a flood. I knew I couldn't stay there all night. I needed to find higher ground, better shelter, and reassess everything. When the water dropped to about 4 feet deep, I climbed down. I moved slowly, testing each step, watching for soft spots or hidden holes. The mud sucked at my boots, and broken branches snagged my pants. I picked my way downstream until I found a wider part of the canyon where the walls weren't as steep. There, I saw a narrow chute leading up. It was steep but climbable. I dropped my soaked pack, tied a rope around it, and started climbing. My hands slipped on the wet rock, but I managed. At the top, I hauled my pack up and looked around. I was on a ridge, flat enough to sleep on, high enough to be safe. Collapsed. That night, I didn't sleep much. My body ached. My hands were cut and bleeding. My legs were bruised. I kept thinking about how close it had been. If I'd been a minute slower, if I hadn't seen that outcrop, if the flood had been higher. So many ifs. The next morning, the sky was clear, but the canyon was still a mess. The flood had carved through it like a knife. I found broken gear, torn clothing, even a crushed camera. I kept moving, following the higher ground whenever I could. It took me 2 extra days to get back to the trailhead. I was out of food and nearly out of water. My phone was dead, soaked during the flood, but I hadn't had a signal out there anyway. When I reached my truck, it was still there, covered in dust. I opened the door, sat behind the wheel, and just breathed. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just sat there, alive. Back home, I told a ranger about the flood. He said a storm system had passed through about 50 miles north, dumped a few inches of rain in an hour. I'd never seen a drop, but that's all it took. He said I was lucky. Most people caught in those canyons don't make it out. He was right. I was lucky, but it wasn't just luck. It was experience, awareness, preparation, and yes, a little bit of luck too. That hike changed how I see everything. I still go into the wild. I still hike alone. But now I watch the sky with different eyes. I listen harder. I pay more attention to what I feel in the air, to the silence, to the heaviness before the storm. Because nature doesn't care how careful you are. It doesn't care how experienced you are. It just moves, fast and without warning. And if you're not ready, if you're not lucky, you don't come back. I came back, bruised, shaken, changed, but alive. And that's enough. I never used to be nervous hiking alone. I liked the quiet, the space to think, the feeling of being out where no one else was. It helped me clear my head. I had done dozens of solo hikes before, even some multi-day ones. I had enough experience to be smart and stay safe. I never took big risks, and I always told someone where I was going. That was my rule. Last fall, I decided to hike a loop trail in the northern part of the state, near a small mountain range most people don't pay attention to. It wasn't a popular area, which was part of why I liked it. The trail was a 17-mile loop with a few side trails that connected to campsites near a lake. I'd camp overnight halfway through and finish the loop the next day. I left early in the morning just after sunrise. The first few miles were peaceful. Leaves crunched under my boots. Everything was quiet except for birds calling through the trees. It was the kind of silence you don't get in daily life. Just wind, trees, and your own footsteps. I passed a small creek and filled my water bottle using a filter. I took my time, no rush. About 5 miles in, the trail turned steep. I stopped for a snack and looked at the elevation map. The climb wasn't too bad, but it would go on for a while. As I got higher, the forest thinned a little. The trees were smaller, and the underbrush cleared out in patches. That's when I started seeing boot prints. Nothing weird about that, just another hiker. But the prints weren't fresh. The edges were dry and crumbly, maybe a day old. A little later, I found an energy bar wrapper tucked into the base of a tree. That annoyed me. I always pack out my trash, and it bothers me when others don't. I picked it up and kept walking. The trail stayed steep for another mile, then leveled out on a ridge. I stopped again for water and checked my phone, but there was no signal. Not unusual out here. The wind was stronger on the ridge. It rustled through the trees and whistled a little. I saw movement below me on the switchbacks. At first, I thought it was an animal, maybe a deer, but it moved in a straight line, too steady. It was someone else hiking. I figured they were coming up behind me. I kept moving. I wasn't trying to race, but I didn't want to stop too long and lose daylight. My camp was still about 4 miles away. I made it there by late afternoon. It was a small, flat area with a fire ring made of rocks and space for a tent. Nearby was a slope leading down to the lake. I went to the water, filtered a few liters, and came back up. The sun was low now. Everything was gold and orange. It was beautiful. I set up my tent, laid out my sleeping bag, and started boiling water for dinner. I kept glancing back down the trail. I still felt like someone was behind me, but the trail stayed quiet. No one came. I ate, cleaned up, and packed everything into my bear bag. I hoisted it into a tree and made sure it was secure. By the time I climbed into my tent, it was dark. No stars, just thick clouds overhead. The wind picked up again, shaking the tent now and then. Sometime after midnight, I woke up. I don't know what woke me. There wasn't a sound at first, just silence. Then I heard a branch snap, not far off. It wasn't like an animal scurrying. It was deliberate. One loud crack, then silence again. I didn't move. I just laid there, holding my breath. I told myself it was probably a deer or a bear. But the longer I waited, the more I started thinking of the person I saw on the switchbacks. Maybe they camped nearby. Maybe they were just walking around. But that didn't make sense either. Another snap, closer this time. I grabbed the small knife I kept near my sleeping bag. I didn't unzip the tent or move around, just stayed still and listened. Eventually, the sounds stopped. No more branches, no more footsteps, just wind. I stayed awake for another hour, maybe more. I must have dozed off again, because when I opened my eyes next, it was morning. Fog had rolled in thick and heavy. I couldn't see more than 20 feet from my tent. I packed up quickly. I didn't eat, just filled my bottle and got moving. The trail back was quieter than before. No birds, no squirrels, just the sound of my own steps again. The fog made it hard to see far, and the air felt heavy. About a mile down the trail, I saw something that stopped me cold. Another wrapper, same kind as before, propped on a rock like someone had set it there on purpose, not just tossed. I picked it up. It was dry, not old, maybe left in the last few hours. I looked behind me. The fog still hung low, making everything feel smaller and closer. I started walking faster. My stomach felt tight. I didn't know why I felt so tense, but I couldn't shake it. I just wanted to finish the hike and get back to my car. The trail dipped into a hollow with thicker trees and more undergrowth. I stopped when I saw something lying in the middle of the trail. At first, I thought it was a branch, but it was a hiking pole, just one, scratched up. The handle was torn like something had chewed or cut into it. I looked around. No pack, no prints nearby, just that one pole sitting there. I picked it up and looked at it. No initials, no gear tag. Kept it. I didn't want to leave it behind in case it was part of something worse. As I climbed out of the hollow, I saw movement again, far up the trail. Just a flash of a dark shape between trees. It was a person, but they were standing still, not walking. I ducked behind a tree and waited. When I peeked again, they were gone. I didn't wait around. I walked fast, checking behind me every few minutes. I didn't want to run. Running felt like it would make things worse. I just kept moving, breathing hard, heart racing. The trail crossed a narrow wooden footbridge over a shallow stream. Right in the middle of the bridge, I found the second hiking pole. Same make as the first, same kind of damage. Torn grip, scratched shaft. I looked upstream and downstream. Nothing, just trees and mist. I dropped both poles on the far side and kept going. That's when I noticed the smell. Faint at first, but getting stronger, like garbage or something rotting. I covered my nose with my sleeve, but it didn't help much. The smell was coming from ahead. I slowed down. Around a bend, I found the source. It was a torn backpack, half buried in leaves, ripped open at the seams. Clothes and gear were scattered around. A cooking pot, a boot, a water bladder, slashed open. Everything smelled like rot and wet plastic. No blood, no obvious damage to the trees or ground. But something had happened here, something bad. I didn't touch anything. I took a photo with my phone and marked the spot on my GPS. I moved fast after that. I wanted out. Every sound felt sharp. Every shadow looked like someone hiding. The fog finally began to lift as I dropped in elevation. I could hear cars faintly in the distance. That helped a little. I reached the trailhead around noon. My car was the only one in the lot. I got in and locked the doors. I sat there for a few minutes, just breathing. Then I drove to the nearest ranger station, 30 minutes away. I showed them the photo, gave them the GPS pin, told them about the gear, the noise at night, and the figure I saw. They took it seriously, took my report, asked questions, sent a team to check the site. A week later, they called me. They had found some of the gear I described, including the backpack. They said it had been left by a hiker reported missing 3 weeks earlier. A guy named Eric from another state. He'd gone in solo, never came out. No sign of his body, just his gear torn and scattered. They didn't find any sign of animals in the area. No signs of a struggle. No blood, no broken trees, just stuff left behind. They said they'd keep investigating. They asked if I wanted to remain available for more questions. I said yes, of course. I kept checking news alerts for a while, but nothing new ever came up. Just that he was still missing. I think about it all the time now. About the sounds in the night, the prints, the poles, that smell, that moment on the trail where someone was just standing there, watching me. I don't hike solo anymore. I still go out, but always with others. I still love the woods, but it's not the same. That silence I used to enjoy, it doesn't feel peaceful now. It feels like it's hiding something. And sometimes, when I'm out there, I think I hear something just beyond the trees. A branch snapping, a boot scuffing on dirt. I turn to look, but there's never anyone there. I had been planning the hike for months. The trail was called Miller Ridge Loop, a 27-mile path that wound through deep forest and steep switchbacks in northern Idaho. I'd found it in an old blog post from a backpacker who described it as challenging but worth it and completely isolated. That last part sold me. I'd been craving a trip without people, noise, or any signs of modern life. Just me, my pack, and the woods. It was early October. The leaves had just started to turn, and the forecast said the weekend would be cool and dry. I packed my gear carefully: lightweight tent, water filter, first aid kit, bear spray, extra layers, and enough food for 4 days. I'd planned to hike the loop counterclockwise, camping 2 nights in the backcountry and finishing the 3rd day by noon. I parked my car at the small gravel lot near the trailhead, locked everything up, slung my pack on, and stepped into the forest. The first day went smooth. The trail climbed gently for the first few miles before dropping into a valley filled with pine and aspen. I passed a creek, filled my bottle with filtered water, and kept moving. That evening, I set up my tent on a flat patch of grass beside a rock outcrop. The view opened to the west where the sun sank slowly behind the hills. I ate a freeze-dried meal, wrote a little in my notebook, and went to sleep early. The second day started early. I was packed up and moving by sunrise. The trail began to climb again, winding higher along the ridge. That's when the switchbacks began, tight, steep, and endless. I climbed for 10 minutes, turn, climb again, turn. The trail was narrow in places, and the drop-off beside it was steep. Some sections had loose gravel that slipped under my boots. I took it slow. By midday, the wind had picked up and clouds moved in. The forest grew thicker as I gained elevation. The trees blocked most of the light, and it started to feel dim and closed in. I kept checking my GPS watch. I was still on the right trail. I stopped to eat a protein bar and noticed something strange. No birds, no bugs, no sound. Just the wind in the trees. I shrugged it off. High altitudes sometimes got quiet like that. Around 3 p.m., I crossed a small wooden bridge over a dried-up creek bed. The trail narrowed again and bent sharply around a rock face. Just beyond it, I found a strange section, about 50 feet of trail where the dirt looked scraped, like something heavy had been dragged through. It wasn't fresh, and I didn't see any footprints, just deep grooves in the dirt and scattered pine needles. Maybe a tree had fallen and been moved. I stepped around it and kept going. The next few miles were harder. The trail got less defined, more overgrown. My map and GPS still said I was on the right path, but it was clear this part of the trail wasn't used much. I had to push through shrubs and step over fallen branches. I started seeing old, faded trail markers nailed to trees, some cracked, others barely visible. At some point, I realized I hadn't seen any recent boot prints in hours. Not that I expected many this deep in, but even popular trails had a few signs of use: broken branches, scuffed rocks, boot treads in soft dirt. Here there was nothing, just overgrown trail and silence. It was nearing 5 p.m. when I decided to stop for the night. I found a small clearing just big enough for my tent and set up. I was higher up now and the wind was stronger. I anchored the tent with extra stakes and used rocks to weigh it down. I boiled water for dinner and ate while sitting on a log. Still no sounds, no birds, no insects, just the wind. That night, I woke up around 2 a.m. to a sound I couldn't place. It wasn't an animal. It was steady, almost mechanical, like a dragging noise. Not close, but not far. It lasted maybe 10 seconds, then stopped. I sat up in my sleeping bag and listened, holding my breath. Nothing, just wind again. I waited a few minutes, heart thumping, then slowly laid back down. Maybe a branch had fallen and slid downhill. I told myself not to overthink it. I eventually fell back asleep. The next morning, I packed up quickly. The trail was rougher than ever, washed out in some places, barely visible in others. I started seeing broken branches, fresh breaks, still green inside. Some were at chest level, not the kind you'd step on, and others looked bent in odd directions. I looked around for signs of animals but saw none. Just more of the same: trees, rocks, and silence. By noon, I reached what should have been the southernmost point of the loop. My GPS said I'd traveled about 18 miles total. I should have been starting to turn back toward the car. But when I reached a clearing that was marked as South Junction on the map, there was no junction, just a mess of fallen trees and overgrowth. The trail ended. I stood there for a long time, staring at the map, trying to make sense of it. I'd followed the trail exactly. My GPS said I was at the right spot, but there was no sign of the rest of the loop. No turn, no markers, no path, just forest. I backtracked half a mile, thinking maybe I'd missed a turn. I didn't find anything. I returned to the clearing again. Still nothing. Then I noticed something strange. More of those drag marks, like I'd seen the day before, but these were fresher. The pine needles were still brushed aside, and there were chunks of dirt exposed like something heavy had scraped over them. I followed the marks for a few yards before they vanished under thick brush. I decided to stop and think. I still had enough food for a day and a half, and my GPS had a breadcrumb trail I could follow back if needed. I didn't want to turn around, but if the trail was gone, I had no choice. I marked my spot on the GPS and turned back the way I'd come. That's when things started to feel wrong. At first, I just noticed that the trail looked different. Not completely, just small things. A rock I didn't remember. A split tree I thought I'd passed earlier, but now it looked whole. I started checking my GPS every 5 minutes. The trail I was walking didn't match the breadcrumb trail I'd taken in. Curved too far left, then right, then uphill too steeply. I stopped walking and looked around. I was lost. Somehow, even while following the trail back, I'd gone off course. My watch kept pinging, off route. I turned in a circle, trying to figure out which way was right. Trees, rocks, the faint outline of trail that could have been anything. I forced myself to stay calm. I still had daylight, supplies, and a general sense of direction. I picked the direction I believed was north and started walking. Slowly, carefully, stopping every few minutes to check my GPS. After about 30 minutes, I came across the same wooden bridge I'd crossed the day before, the one over the dry creek bed. I sighed in relief, but then I saw the drag marks again. More of them, fresher now. This time they led away from the trail and into the trees. Deep grooves, as if something had been pulled through the dirt with force. I stood there, staring at them, and a chill went down my spine. I wasn't scared of animals. I was scared of people. Something about those marks didn't feel natural. I kept moving faster now. I passed landmarks I remembered, the scraped earth, the rock face, the overgrown brush. But then I saw something I didn't recognize at all. An old tarp, shredded and faded, caught in the branches of a tree about 20 feet off trail. I climbed the slope to check it out. The tarp was tangled and weathered. Beneath it was a rusted cooking pot, a torn backpack strap, and a broken zipper. That's when I realized someone else had been here. Someone who didn't make it out. I didn't wait around. I got back on the trail and hiked fast. The light started to fade around 6 p.m., and I knew I wouldn't make it back before dark. I found a small hollow between some rocks and set up my tent with shaky hands. I didn't eat. I didn't write in my notebook. I just sat inside with the zipper shut and my bear spray in one hand, flashlight in the other. That night, I didn't sleep. Around midnight, I heard it again, that dragging sound. Closer now. 10 seconds. Then nothing. Then again, maybe 20 feet away. I held my breath, heart racing, body frozen. I didn't move until the sky started turning gray. At first light, I packed everything and got moving. I didn't care about the trail anymore. I just followed my GPS northwest, the direction of the parking lot. I bushwhacked through brush, stumbled over logs, tore my pants on thorns. I drank water from a creek without filtering. I didn't stop to eat. Every hour, I checked my GPS. I was getting closer. Around 3 p.m., I broke through a line of trees and saw the gravel road. I almost cried. My car was still there, untouched, waiting. I unlocked it with shaking hands, threw my pack in the back, and sat in the driver's seat for almost 10 minutes before starting the engine. I didn't report anything. I didn't tell anyone about the tarp, or the drag marks, or the sounds. I didn't write about it online. I just drove home, took a long shower, and put my gear away. I still hike, but not alone anymore, not off-grid, and never near Miller Ridge again. I don't know what happened out. I took time off work after months of constant overtime. I needed to clear my head. My plan was to drive out to a national forest a few hours away, hike a rarely used ridge trail that cut across several peaks, camp overnight, and loop back down on the second day. I'd mapped it all out carefully. According to trail info I found online, the path was poorly marked in some sections but still walkable with a GPS and compass. That was exactly what I wanted. Peace. No noise. No people. Just trees and wind. I left early in the morning, just after 5 a.m., and reached the trailhead around 8:30. The gravel lot was empty. I geared up slowly, backpack, water bladder, emergency kit, extra socks, jacket, and snacks in the side pockets. I did a quick check on my GPS unit and made sure the printed topo map was tucked in the front pocket of my pack. My phone had no service already, so I switched it to airplane mode to save battery. I locked the car and headed in. The first few miles were peaceful. The air was cool, the trail soft under my boots. I moved through a dense pine forest, the needles muffling my footsteps. Birds called above me, and the wind rustled the canopy. I kept a steady pace. The incline wasn't too steep, just slow and constant. I stopped for water often. Around midday, the trees thinned out and the trail opened up to a long ridge that dropped steeply on both sides. I could see mountains rolling off into the distance like giant waves. No sign of roads, houses, or people, just ridges and valleys. I checked my GPS and followed the route carefully. There were forks where I had to stop and compare the terrain with the map. A few times I circled around looking for faded blazes or cairns, but I stayed on track. Around 3 p.m., I found a small clearing below a shelf of rock that looked like a good place to set up camp. There was a flat patch of grass, a few scattered trees, and some natural wind cover. I dropped my pack and sat for a while, just listening. There wasn't a single sound except the breeze and birds. I pitched my tent slowly, took off my boots to let my feet breathe, and ate a sandwich I'd packed. I boiled water from my supply and made a cup of tea. By evening, I'd built a small fire using dead wood and sat beside it as the sun lowered behind the hills. The forest started to cool fast. Shadows stretched across the ridge. I added a few more sticks to the fire and sat with my knees tucked to my chest. I wasn't scared, not yet. The silence felt natural, peaceful. I fell asleep a little after 9. The fire had burned down to glowing coals. I lay in my sleeping bag listening to insects clicking outside the thin fabric of the tent. I didn't hear anything strange that night. No footsteps, no breaking branches, no breathing outside the tent. Just the usual noises you hear in the woods. It was the next morning that things started to feel different. I woke early and unzipped the tent. The air was colder than I expected. Mist hung low across the ridge. My fire pit was a ring of white ash, and the grass was damp with dew. I packed up quickly, ate a granola bar, filled my water bottle, and got back on the trail. My goal was to loop down the south face of the ridge and make it back to the car by late afternoon. The descent trail was steeper and more uneven than the way up. I followed what looked like the path based on the map and GPS, but something felt off. The trail was narrow and overgrown in parts. I checked the GPS every few minutes and adjusted when I saw I was drifting off course. Around mid-morning, I realized I hadn't seen a single trail marker in over an hour. I wasn't too worried yet. I had my tools. I backtracked slightly, looking for a fork I might have missed, but everything looked the same. I marked a spot with a stick so I wouldn't walk in circles and kept moving. The ridge dipped sharply, and I entered a gully filled with deadfall. Trees lay crisscrossed like matchsticks, their roots clawing out of the soil. I had to climb over them, hands and knees at times, sliding down wet bark and slipping on moss. I kept checking the GPS. It showed I was still moving roughly toward the return trail, but slowly, very slowly. By noon, I was tired and more than a little uneasy. I found a flat rock and sat down to eat and checked the map. I didn't like what I saw. The GPS route was jittering, jumping around every time I moved a few feet. I tapped the device and held it up, but it kept flickering. The batteries were fine. I pulled out the compass and looked at the map again. That's when I felt it. That feeling that something's not quite right. That tiny crack that forms in the back of your mind. Not full panic, just a slow widening sense that you might not be where you thought you were. I kept going. The ground got worse. Soggy patches, mud that sucked at my boots. I slipped a few times and once fell on my side, jarring my elbow. I cursed out loud, wiped dirt off my pants, and kept walking. I started noticing that the terrain didn't match the map anymore. The trail should have followed a creek, but there was no water. No sound of running water either. Just silence. Too much silence. Around 2 p.m., I started climbing again. I didn't mean to, the route should have been going downhill. But the trail kept pulling upward, and I followed it, hoping it was a curve back toward the main path. Trees thinned out again, and I found myself on a new ridge, one I didn't recognize. From the top, I looked out and tried to match the peaks to my map. Nothing lined up, not even close. That's when the knot in my stomach tightened. I wasn't just off trail, I was off map. I sat down and thought carefully. I had water, snacks, a backup power bank, warm clothes. I could hunker down if needed. I decided to follow the ridgeline down, hoping it would eventually intersect with the main loop trail or a forest road. I marked trees with strips of cloth as I went, just in case I had to backtrack. But the ridge didn't go down, curved, then rose again, then dropped into a ravine choked with thorns and nettles. I had to climb over sharp rocks and through thick underbrush. My legs started stinging from small cuts. I checked the time. 4:47 p.m. I'd been hiking nearly nonstop since early morning. I needed to stop soon. I found a level patch near some large boulders and decided to camp there. I set up my tent, but there was no firewood nearby, just wet ground and brush. I sat inside the tent and ate the last of my sandwiches. I drank water slowly. I listened. That night was different. Couldn't sleep. The forest felt wrong. Too still. I didn't hear any animals, not even insects. I lay awake for hours, ears straining for sound. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps, but it might have been a branch falling. I didn't go out to check. Morning came like a slow crawl. I felt groggy and my legs ached. I packed up and started again. My plan now was simple. Move in a straight line southeast using my compass and try to intersect a known area. But the terrain fought me every step of the way. Slopes, loose rock, thorns. I ripped my jacket climbing over a rotten log. I scraped my palms slipping down a wet bank. Around mid-morning, I saw something that made my heart stop. A faded trail marker nailed to a tree, not one I'd seen before. I ran toward it and found a narrow trail. I didn't know where it led, but I followed it. The trail twisted and dipped. It wasn't on my map. There were no footprints, just overgrown plants pressed down slightly by time and weather. I kept moving. Every now and then I'd see another marker, faded almost to white. That was enough. I walked for hours. The sun was directly overhead when I came to a clearing. I almost cried. There was an old fire ring in the middle, blackened with soot. Some empty cans nearby, signs of people. I dropped my pack and sat down hard. I was shaking. I ate my last protein bar, drank water, and pulled out my map again. Nothing matched. This clearing wasn't marked, but it meant I was getting closer. That evening, just before dark, I saw it. A real trail. A wide, well-used path with visible footprints and a plastic trail marker that matched the park style. I stumbled onto it, my heart pounding. I followed it downhill as fast as I could without twisting an ankle. It took another hour, but just as night fell, I saw the roof of the ranger station. I nearly collapsed when I reached the gravel lot. My car was still there, dusty, untouched. I unlocked it with shaking hands and sat inside for a long time before starting the engine. I didn't report it. I didn't tell anyone. I just drove home, showered, and slept for 14 hours straight. Looking back, I realize how lucky I was. It wasn't a wild animal or weather that almost got me. It was my own assumptions, thinking I could handle it, trusting gear too much, underestimating how fast terrain can change. I didn't need a ghost or monster in the woods. The forest itself was enough. I still hike, but now I double-check everything. I stick to known trails. I leave markers. I don't rely only on tech. And when I feel that creeping sense in the